So, my name is Chloe. I'm originally from France, and I've been working, doing researches on the topic like blockchain and real estate from 2.5 years now. And what about title registries and conveyance? It's funny because I had to write an article about how could actually blockchain disrupt real estate transaction for a French title registry system last year for blockchain consulting company in France. And they right now just gathered the corporate financial support to actually build up a POC. So it's actually really a two-day topic that corporate are also getting into. And right now I'm gonna let them introduce themselves.
So I'm a land registrar in the Netherlands, Dutch land registry. Working since 2005 already at the land registry. Before that I was a notary for a few years. I especially like IT developments and international developments. So I'm heavily involved in all kinds of issues such as blockchain. We did some proof of concepts within Dutch Kadaster as well. And together with notaries we're trying to get to know a little bit more about the feasibility of blockchain when it comes to measuring land, for instance, and just people gaining new developed plots of land. And actually tomorrow I'm flying to Tallinn to talk about blockchain with our European colleagues as well, just to see whether it would be feasible to have a land registry on a blockchain.
Thank you.
My name is Bergmans. I can use this one. My name is Bas Bergmans. Actually, we say Bas Bergmans in England, because otherwise everybody thinks I'm the boss. I actually came up in this space through quite a sort of a long way. I worked like 10 years in companies like Gundert, in transaction services, financial markets, moved to Shanghai, and I started my own business. And this business basically grew out into a pretty sizable US business that was sold in 2016. And during this period, I collected some real estate, I invested in some startup. I did some early investments in a real estate management company and a sustainability company and in an online fractional ownership transaction company in real estate. And when in 2016 I sort of sat back in the backyard and thinking like, okay, what will be my next venture? And I realized how difficult it was sort of to get some liquidity out of my own real estate. I saw what was happening with Brick Fund, the fractional ownership investment company that we had built up. I think acquired like 20 million euros to list real estate on that platform. And we were basically approached by the authorities for financial markets saying like, you guys are like a typical real estate fund, but we want to be like super highway for real estate transactions and not owning the real estate. So that actually made me to say, okay, we do this again, but then we do it right. And with what blockchain can do and tokenization and knowing what for illiquid assets there are on the balance sheets of commercial companies, we decided to start BrickEX, and that's what I'm doing today.
Great. So my name is Gonzalo. I'm the head of investor relations at BrickBlock. We are based out of Berlin. And basically what we're doing is we're tokenizing real estate. A little bit of my background, I had no idea, but I also lived in Shanghai. So this is... And so I used to live in Shanghai, and a lot of what I did in Shanghai was to help consulting firms build operations. I also lived in Nashville, and I was involved more in startups, from market research to also housing vacations and things like that. And then I moved to Berlin because I was really interested in blockchain. I've been investing in cryptocurrency for a little over 2 years now, and I was always trying to find that perfect mix of taking blockchain into a very traditional space and how to have that perfect synergy. And that's what we're doing at BrickBlock, because What we've been able to do with BrickBlock is we're keeping the very traditional way of doing things in real estate, such as having SPVs, managing directors, and things of that nature. And all we're doing is tweaking what seems to be like a very small aspect, which is changing the limited partners and making them the token holders. But really, in essence, that has a huge influence into everything from how a real estate developer is able to change their funding strategies to how you're now able to have full exposure to investors on a global scale that previously you didn't have access to. So that's what we're doing at BrickBlock, and yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you. So we're happy to have among us like Kadaster, a representative of BrickEX, and another one from BrickBlock, which actually they don't have like the same business model and the same way of exploiting blockchain technology. Then my next question would be, what characteristic of blockchain technology do you use for your projects, respectively?
In our case, I think the tokenization of real estate, and what I heard this morning is the most important one, and to create sort of the exchange option that you can create a digital asset exchange for real estate. And what I heard this morning, I thought that was really interesting, where people talked about where they actually moved a deed over the blockchain. And we had this presentation of the person that had the asset and the smart contract and the governance basically built in. That I thought was like super complicated. And I would never be able to sort of understand this, and that's also not what we are doing. What we are doing is basically taking the ownership, put it in a special purpose vehicle, tokenize this, and give the opportunity to people to start transactions, to basically transact this. So I would think that's a much more simplified model than what I've heard this morning. But it's accessing a huge sort of investment and providers market with people that have huge illiquid assets on their balance sheet and that want to create liquidity. And there are investors that don't have access to this very interesting investment opportunities because they maybe have a small amount in the bank, but they want to do this, and that's actually the market that we try to open with blockchain.
Yeah, and it's very similar to what we're doing as well. But I think also what is most interesting is through the use of smart contracts, and we are a security token, is we're changing the complete strategy of not only for everyday investors, such as, let's say, myself. If I live in Mexico City, I only have $100. Right now, with the way the financial institutions are, and let's just take Mexico, I'm very limited to what I can do with my money, right? So this, through the perspective of an everyday investor, it creates a new definition of what it means to build wealth. So that's exciting. But really, what's also exciting is if I'm a real estate developer, and let's say I have a particular project that I need funding for, let's just take a number, $50 million. Usually, by traditional manners, I go to the bank, and I also rely on the typical investor pool, investor networks that I have to fund my project. Now, if you're introducing this new tokenization, this new way to have funding, you're completely changing how a real estate developer goes through with their projects, right? So you're now able to, in a very customizable way, say, okay, well, now I can put 20% of that 50 million, I can tokenize that, and then the rest, I can still go to my banks, I can still go to my investors, or I can just say, look, 45 million of that, tokenize it, 5 million to one particular ticket holder. That's the use of this technology. Also, what it brings is customization. And that's a level that I think is also very exciting. And it can really be risk. If you're somebody that's very risk averse, you can approach it slowly. Or if you're somebody that really wants to take full advantage, you can really just put your entire asset into the blockchain. So this customization is what I think is really exciting, and it's something that I didn't see coming in and understanding the real estate market, because I don't have a real estate background. But what I understood, what can be done with the technology, and then seeing what can be done in what is a very traditional market, that is very exciting for not only the veterans, but also individuals that are coming up in the real estate industry.
So I'm from the land registry, the classic part, so to speak. Within the land registry, you have some kind of a triple between an object, a subject, and a write in rem. And there are all kinds of relations between those three items. And that makes it rather difficult to put something like that with all kinds of relevances and all kinds of relations on a blockchain. So what we're not trying to do in the Netherlands is trying to automate our land registry, because we already have that automated for quite a bit. What we have seen in Europe, but also outside of Europe, for instance at Honduras, the first project that would implement a land registry on a blockchain, is that they are not always that successful. In fact, I think even the countries that are already mentioned today do not put a land registry on a blockchain. What they put on a blockchain is nothing else than just a pointer or a hash that refers to a deed or to a document or a contract. And that will be put on the blockchain. And what will happen with the deed itself, once this database where all these deeds will be filled in and put in, will be corrupted somehow. Then you have a blockchain with some hashes and some pointers, and then what do you have? So that's what we're not trying to do. What we are doing is kind of creating some kind of a service level, some kind of a service layer where all kinds of people can act with basic information. And for this information, first you need to organize, so you need to cooperate together. And after that you need to standardize, and that's the most difficult part, I think. So that's also what I hear next to me by my neighbors, because they say, well, we just tokenize it. We don't want to try and find and identify all the objects, because it's already been done, for instance, by Dutch Land Registry when it comes to the Netherlands. But even within Dutch Land Registry, we have all kinds of pilots that were working in close cooperation, for instance, with some banks. They have the difficulty that they cannot standardize all the items that we have right now. So that's only step 2. And after that, once you have standardized, then you need to computerize. And that's the most difficult part. So I don't think it's not possible, but it will be taking a lot of time before we can have a land registry on a blockchain.
Could you explain us how did it went with the government and how the initiative just set up?
We started in 2016, just by people asked us, well, would you like to join us in some small pilot? And we said, of course we will. Then we thought, well, what do we need to automate then? We have a register of ships, which is a really small database. It's only 60,000 items. And of course, there are rights in rem involved and some people involved, but it's not that big. So we thought, well, let's try to find out and let's see if it's feasible to automate this register into a land registry on the blockchain, or a ship registry, in fact. But that's not that easy. So we said, okay, well, we have this first program within the Netherlands with all the other governmental organizations. And we did a pilot on that. It's called the blockchainpilots.nl. And then afterwards we thought, well, we have to continue somehow. And we created our own blockchain pilots. And quite currently we're still talking with notaries to find out whether we can automate more items than just now, and to see whether we can service the whole information stream, so the whole e-conveyancing chain.
Okay, and how many are you working on this project, and what's right now the status? Are you on the prototype, proof of concept, or?
Within Kadaster we are with 5 people working on it. We have a total in the Netherlands of 1,300. Okay. So only 5 on blockchain. 1 lawyer, that's me. 1 technician. 1 person from strategy, and some other people as well. And what we're doing, we're not building ourselves. We just have a tender. We need to tender because of European regulations, of course. And then we select a contractor, and he or she will build this prototype, which is not actually a prototype, it's just a proof of concept. And we say, okay, well, this is feasible, this can be done. And for us, it's the most important part that we want people to have their own information back by themselves, so they will be the owner of their own data. We want a self-sovereign identity at a European level, but at least in the Netherlands. So right now we have a Dutch blockchain coalition working very hard on creating this self-sovereign identity, which is the most important part, I think, as a starting point, just to create more added value of blockchain things.
Okay, thank you. This leads me actually like to another question to like all of you, like what are actually the barriers you're facing right now, and what is the reaction of the traditional and existing actor on the market? Like, is there a difference between the reaction to tokenization versus the reaction to title registries?
So I can say that whenever I'm having conversations with real estate representatives, companies, and then right away they start to get a little bit confused about what it means tokenization if the whole issue of the title registry is involved. And then I have to explain that no, that remains with you as the entity that sets up the SPV. As soon as that part of the discussion is understood, then the conversation completely changes. Because I noticed that is one of the aspects that they understand so well, and we notice that as long as we're able to keep something very traditional as part of the equation, then it's much easier to have the other conversation, which is the issue of liquidity, which is a huge hurdle, and it's one of the biggest hurdles that we discussed. As soon as we're able to discuss that, and as soon as we're able to discuss the implications of what we're doing, I've realized that even some of the biggest players are very, very interested and want to continue the conversation. But also from their end, they want to understand it as much as possible. Because, I mean, as we can see from most of the people that were here, the vast majority are real estate background, real estate experts that understand what this technology can do. So a lot of it is that. A lot of it I see as a bit of a lessons from one meeting to 2 to 3. But then once they get it, then they start wanting to, have something written down and really get started.
Yeah, I think we experienced a similar thing, but additionally is the jurisdiction where we talk with investors. And one thing that we have decided at the start of this year is that we want to include the US. The US is, apart from that, I'm based there, and I think it's an important market because it holds like 50% of all the real estate value in the world. The data of this real estate value is very good documented and data-based, so it's a perfect market to actually start doing this in. But then you basically walk into the SEC regulatory requirements. And I think that has delayed a lot to build a structure that, as an entity that works to recruit investment, but also to make sure that your token is actually a security. And we have sort of visited a few events where they focused on this, how to deal with the US as a jurisdiction, and you have to go through some real thorough steps as a company. If you think of our company as a combination of the founders of Mecenas and the founders of Brick Fund. The founders of Mecenas actually, that company did an ICO in September, and it kept the US outside of their ICO. And their whole offering as well, because if you start to tokenize, Mecenas actually tokenizes fine art, which is similar to tokenizing real estate, if I keep it short. And then if you keep the US out, you see you lose a big part of your market, and that's exactly what we don't want to do. So we have decided to incorporate that jurisdiction, and it complicates the things, but it attracts a lot of investors as well, because they want you to basically succeed in being able to be legitimate in the US.
It's interesting because we are completely excluding the US. And so a lot of people ask us, why shouldn't you do the US? Because I mean, it's a huge market. Well, if you exclude the US, you're still dealing with a massive global market. Are you still doing, so you're doing both US and also European?
Yeah. So I think if you deal with the US, you can deal with the rest of the world, because everybody will follow security laws in the US mainly, right? And it makes total sense. And until end of 2017, everybody in this space actually included the US, and thought we'd just go ahead. But I think the SEC, they will come down hard on this, because there is a lot of money to be protected from people that invest. So we had a very conscious decision to say, okay, in that case, it will come down here. If you think of your KYC and your AML, it's so super difficult to say, okay, you cannot buy my tokens because you are from the US, that you will always be violating, ultimately you're likely always violating the SEC regulations. So our decision is very clear. But I totally understand that you exclude them, because it's a big job.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and also I noticed that with the issue with KYC AML that we run into is every bank that you use has a particular guideline on KYC AML. But from my understanding is that, and from what I see with the SEC, is that the decisions that they're making are far slower than those that are being made in Europe or the EU. And I think it's going to be one of those situations in which once they decide to make these moves, other parties in Europe, EU, will be much more prepared to really take advantage of the market.
Thank you for this clever debate over if it's worth here right now going for to the US when you do tokenization. Can we have like maybe your opinion on the reaction over the market when it comes to title registries, please?
Yeah, I think there's we're quite open within the Netherlands, at least. We always say we have a public register. It's public to everybody. Everybody can see everything within the register. We don't have any secrets in that case, and that counts the same for developing our software. It's open source. So what we did, for instance, was when we finished our proof of concept, we said, okay, now we wrote a challenge for the Dutch blockchainers. That's the main hackathon in the Netherlands. And what we did is we put this working package within this open software. We said, okay, well, try to create something very new and very unique, and please make us obsolete. That would be perfect, because since 2005 I'm at Dutch Kadaster, and I have always tried to make myself obsolete. And that's quite difficult, I must say, because what we did, we automized the deeds, for instance, that we receive from the notaries. Up until now we have about 50% of all the deeds that are shared on a basis that are sent to us using XML files. So we can automatically record them in our system, and we can update our registration on that. But still, it's not 100%. That's not just for nothing, because in practice, everybody is creating something for their own, and we are challenging ourselves every time again by creating more and more difficult transactions and circumstances. So it's quite difficult to automate everything. That's, I think, more a threshold than, for instance, legislation or willing to automate things. That's more the issue, I think.
Okay, like you just mentioned deeds. Would you be able to explain the difference between deed and title registry?
Yeah, thanks. There are all kinds of systems throughout the world. We have from the origin a French system, which is a deeds-based system. That means that the deed itself is the most important part, so the notary is mandatory in the process of transfer of ownership. But also Dutch Kadaster is mandatory in this case, because the notary has to record the deed in our land registry, and only then you will become the owner. Just to get a closer look into our land registry, you would need to see 20 million deeds or more. And because that's not possible for people to do, we created, of course, an index, so you can see which deed you should need. And this index, that's the land registry, which is online and available for everybody. And this online index, that's not the most important legal part, because everybody can find all the kind of things in this index. But when you want to take a closer look and you want to know what's the legal position, then you need to look into the deed itself. And this deed is notarial deed that is recorded in our land registry. That's the most important part right now. In Germany, for instance, or in Spain, that's quite different. Then there is no deed that is sent to the public. No people only have to look into the register. So there's really a difference. That's a title-based system. You also have this deeds-based system, like in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and France. And there is, but that's a little bit too much, I think, but there's also a torrent system, like in Australia and in the Australasian countries. But that's a more complex part, I think, for now.
Okay, thank you. We have room for like a few questions from the audience. Does someone have one?
Jacques, what's, for your system, what's the benefit to blockchain and what's the downside if you do end up adopting that?
I don't think we will adopt it for land registry, because land registry really is too complex. We have about 460 different types of transactions, which would all have to be automated into this blockchain facility. So that's really a difficult part. The downside would be, well, for Dutch Kadaster, that we would perhaps no longer exist, but I don't see that as a downside, because it would create perhaps a lot of value for people. On the other hand, I really don't believe that will happen, because in the end, you need somebody who attestates who is a specific type of person, or who is capable of acting, or who is, well, we have the notary, for instance. He's checking, or she is checking, who is the owner. It's also checking whether somebody's capable of acting, and without those checks, you can't rely on the contract, on the business rule that you will create, or on the smart contract, as it's properly called.
And following up with that, with what you guys are doing, my understanding, I could be wrong, is that some of the commercial properties in the Netherlands are held by a corporation, and when they want to buy commercial properties, they actually transfer the corporation or buy the corporation. Is that correct? And if so, is that how someone could change ownership but not the title? So effectively they change ownership, but the title doesn't change. Is that?
So yeah, I think the title maybe changes to another entity. But I'm actually very happy what you tell us, that it's almost not possible, because I've been thinking this through, and if we would sort of build this in our system ourselves, I almost believe there is no capability to build a smart contract that can basically list all these attributes, and there's so many subject things in real estate that maybe the square meters and all these things are maybe very clear, but color and redecoration and for land it's probably pipelines or something that maybe run through a land, which I just, so here I really think this is the part we should not touch, and that's why we have it simplified to the way that you explain it. Like the title goes to another entity, and we basically start tokenizing this and start trading it. And I actually understand that that's a very simple solution, and that what you have been telling this morning, for instance, is very complicated, but we're like for-profit investment company, right, that wants to create an opportunity for a whole different market where you actually look, yeah, pretty intelligently to how you can move this to new technology, which I think is pretty amazing, though.
Yeah, I think also we shouldn't limit, like right now we're talking about how difficult it is, and I agree with you, I'm really happy that this is a situation, but we can't be too naive about how many talented engineers there are out there, because all this is open source, and I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are just continuously learning the code and improving the code, and we see it all the time. So right now we're saying that it's very difficult, but you know, I mean, if this conversation was brought up 10 years ago, people would think, okay, that's impossible. You can't have this sort of, you know, Bitcoin, which no banks, no middlemen, that's impossible. So we can't say that we'll definitely say it's too difficult right now, but you know, there's a lot of smart people out there that are continuously pushing and pushing and pushing. What does it look like right now? It's probably not going to be a smart contract. It's going to be something else. I mean, it'll be impossible to say what it is, but I will be very surprised if, let's say, 10 years from now, we're still having this conversation.
Actually, for our model, I think once you guys solve this, it's great for us too, right? Because I think we just directly integrate it. We almost like take how you either the technology or your blockchain, and we deal with it. So I think at the end of sort of the stage, we can just use it.
That's also what we would like to do. Just share these data and share. Right now we charge a fee. Yeah, of course, nothing is for free. But then, in the end, when it's open source and it's open to the public, then please go ahead. But still, I think it will be tempting, and it will be a very difficult way to get there. Especially that we're trying to implement some kind of a programmable economy. But up until now, everybody's designing new things and creating new things from a legal perspective, from an organizational perspective, from a technical perspective. And all these things have to match somehow. So if you ask me for new technology, I believe that artificial intelligence will be combined with blockchain, perhaps something that will bring us a little bit more than just smart contracts, because smart contracts are just reactive. You're just coding what will be happening. But once something is not coded and it really happens in practice, then you have a problem. And who will solve this problem?
We talked about doing this, and if it was possible, and then artificial intelligence comes up, and then you think about like chips or sensors in the building and I think that went like way too far for us, right? So that wouldn't bring this to a commercial model within the next 5 years. So let's not do it. But for you, it's a good cause.
We have one last question.
Yes, Jacques. I think you're too modest. I think the land registry is really an example in the Netherlands. It's an example for the whole world how it functions. It's really fast, convenient, reliable. From all over the world, people come to see how it functions. And I can imagine that you cannot take 10 steps in one go. But could you consider a system where you start with a state-owned or government-run blockchain with a real estate register, where you can also transact and transfer legal title if there's no change in the title. So just the amendment, the change of the subject owning the real estate, not changing the real estate as such, creating rights, but that you use the old system with reliable, very competent notaries drafting deeds and creating or amending the property rights, where the property rights are not changed, and it's just going from Alice to Bob, well, you can do it through the system. And once this is up and running, you can iterate and go on with further possibilities, and in the next steps, you may expand the system types. So is that not a way to go?
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. It starts with just creating a blockchain. Well, who will have a node, for instance? I would say, well, the notaries, together with the bailiffs, together with governmental parties as well, all people that are reacting on and are facilitated by the information that we share. Then you create a blockchain for the most simple cases, which we have more or less, not with the smart contract, but with the style sheets, with the XML information. That is kind of, those are business rules, but they're more or less smart contracts, also coded in front of the real happening. But then you have only half of all these deeds, all these transactions, because in a lot of transactions something happens. A plot will be split into two halves, so there will be two new plots. Who will identify them? You say, well, just first exclude that. I can imagine that, but then it will only be feasible for half of the transactions. So that would mean that we would do all the transactions on a blockchain, and in that case, I don't see any added value, because then you have a monopoly already, and blockchain was supposed to eliminate all these monopolies and these trusted third parties. So it's quite in conflict with the original idea, I think. And I don't see what it really adds. I know that, for instance, in Estonia, people are also trying to implement a blockchain land registry. They're looking at it and they say, well, okay, it's useful, maybe useful, but only for our own processes. Then I really doubt and I ask myself, what is the real added value of a blockchain in that case? So why not a traditional blockchain with reading and writing rights? Traditional database will do the same, I think.
We're done. Wait, sorry.
We'll talk about over beers. Give me a question over some beer. I'll answer that question.
Thank you.